No, but I'm still on hold for a second.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the third of a series on the core components of rapid rehousing. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to move the PowerPoint around. Today, we are going to hear, and I'm still trying to figure out how to move the PowerPoint. If you don't mind, I'm going to slow us down here for a second because I'm having a little bit of trouble.
Sharon, I think if you just go to your screen.
Okay. Got it.
All right.
Got it. Today's speaker is Kay Mosier-McDivitt from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, Vera Beach from Community Rebuilders from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Kimberly Tucker from St. Joseph's Villa. Before we get started, I want to do some basics. On your right-hand side, you should have a little box that shows you some of the controls. There's a little box that says questions. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, please pose them there. We will not be answering questions if people raise their hand through the little device that it offers us there, and of course you will be muted throughout the call. So if you could please pose your questions there. Some other basics: this webinar is being recorded, and slides will be available for those who are interested in downloading them after today's session, and you will be able to access the full webinar on our website within the week as well. Okay, so what we're talking about today is the core components of rapid rehousing case management and services. So back in December, we had a webinar largely dedicated to looking at housing identification, the strategies that people are using to engage landlords, recruit them, make housing available. The second webinar we did in January looked at providing financial assistance and how folks are using and packaging rent resources to assist families and individuals to move quickly out of homelessness and back into housing. And today's webinar is focused almost exclusively on the case management and services. What happens with families? What are the services that we're going to provide? So I'm going to turn it over first to Kay to tell us a little bit about the core, the principles of rapid rehousing case management and services.
So hello everyone, and again, I share with Sharon and saying welcome to the webinar today. So I work in the centers, or in the Alliance's Center for Capacity Building, and we do rapid rehousing clinics. And one of the things that we've learned in going out in clinics is that rapid rehousing case management is one of the pieces that folks really struggle with. So one of the things that, as we've done the training, we've really looked at communities that are effective in rapid rehousing case management, is that we've identified that there are 4 core principles that we think and that we're seeing that programs share when they're really effective in providing best practice case management that's effective in ending homelessness for folks. So these core principles are listed here on the slide. So number 1, case management needs to be client-driven. Second, it needs to be housing retention focused. Third, it needs to be home-based. And finally, it needs to be collaborative. But I also want to say that, you know, it's not the collaborative is down there because it's the least important, because in some, while all of these are important, and you will also, as I talk about them, you'll see how they, you know, each one of them is filters into another one of them. But I think it's going to help you really think about when you provide case management and when you look at the folks that are doing case management and job descriptions, is these are the things that we need to be thinking about. And collaboration is huge, because rapid rehousing intervention is a short-term intervention, and folks need to build those support services. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as the final bullet, but not by any means the least important bullet. So the next slide, Sharon. And what I'm going to say also is I'm going to go over these basic principles, but then each of you, hearing from folks that actually do this and do this well is important. And so once hearing from both Vera and Kimberly, I know both of them, and they've really incorporated these principles into their rapid rehousing programs, so they're going to really give you the meat of this. But first of all, what does it mean to be client-driven? So one of the things what we talk about with client-driven services, and that really hangs people up, is this first word, voluntary. What does it mean to be voluntary? And folks are consistently concerned that, in order to get, the money, that people need to be expected to do certain things, or that they'll never be able to maintain their housing. And we've, in fact, found that using this voluntary model has the opposite effect, but it's how you do it that's important. So you need to ensure that services are client-directed and they're respectful of their right to self-determination. And again, they need to be voluntary unless there's a specific statute within a funding source that says you have to do something, and then it should just be the minimal amount of case management that's required by that regulation. So participation in services should not be required to receive the financial assistance that comes through rapid rehousing. But making that happen is the second piece. It says it requires active client engagement. So it's really critical when you're using this voluntary case management model. But I just want to encourage you, it's the same thing that all of us feel. Like when we feel that we're engaged in a process, that we're driving the process and it's something we want, we're going to participate in services. We're not going to have people tell us what to do when we feel like we're part of the process. Remember, the folks that we're housing and rapidly housing want to be housed. They don't want to be homeless. Nobody chooses to be homeless. They want to be in their housing. So they're going to be self-motivated and driven when they feel like this is their plan to keep their housing. But how you engage from the front door is really important. And we see a lot of programs that start out by meeting clients by sort of saying, you must do this and you must do this, or sort of that, authority kind of thing. And this is a real shift in really looking at how we provide case management, where it's about just getting to know someone. So, how do we know that building that initial front door client engagement relationship so that participation does become voluntary? And then on the slide, it also talks about it being strength-based, so as to empower the client. And again, it's not about focusing on client needs. It's about focusing on client strengths, which again, we find is such a paradigm shift for how we've tended to do standard case management. And we do a lot of this needs assessment, but it really is sort of what are your strengths to maintain your housing, and so how are you going to be able to do that? And then again, remembering that clients direct when, where, and how often. And that's really critical, that how often case management occurs. So, and what works for them. If we're doing case management and we've got people that are moving out of shelters and they're moving into housing, especially in the beginning of the process, we see a lot of times programs want to do a lot of, we've got to be here a lot of times and come out a lot in the beginning, but folks are already in a lot of crisis. Moving is very stressful for folks, and just getting acclimated to the neighborhood is very stressful. So what's going to work for them? And again, I always use that framework of what would work for me. If this was me and I was involved in a program, how would I feel? And if I can say, well, this is a time of day that's not good for me because kids are getting out from school, or I need to be making appointments, but if we can do this at another time, and this is where flexibility is really important, and good, best practice programs often have case managers that have to have very flexible schedules, be available evenings or weekends, because that's when folks are available to be seen. So it's really important to remember that if we're going to be successful in these programs. So let's go to the next slide, Sharon, and talk about housing retention focus. Sharon, next slide.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with my keyboard here. I'm sorry. There we go.
Okay, so everything that you do, and when you develop your case plans, or whatever you call them, is that it needs to be focused on housing retention. What is it going to take for folks to be retaining their housing? We find that often case plans are focused on everything but housing retention, and so it's just really important to think is, what is, when we're looking at someone's plan, is, what does this have to do with them retaining their housing? Because that's what case management in rapid rehousing is about. And remembering that plans need to look very, very individualized, that both financial assistance that you heard before from the last seminar, excuse me, and also the case management assistance is very flexible, and it's not program driven. It's really important that you don't have program standards, that every plan looks exactly the same about, how much case management and what are those specific things people are doing. But again, going back to the first one of being client driven, that it's client driven and it's all focused on retaining housing. And case plans are lease-based. So what does a lease look like? And even sitting down, and that's what drives your plan. Look at a lease. What are the things that somebody's going to need to do to maintain their lease, and then developing the goals based on the lease. Client-driven goals based on what they need to maintain their lease. I think the next bullet's really important is really allowing families and household space. We use the term families here, but to me, I use that term sort of liberally, because if you're a single person and you're living on your own, that's your family. So families, household space to test and problem solve, especially, working with landlords, like instead of us always sort of solving every problem, it's about folks being able to do their own problem solving and giving them the space to do that. But now the switch side of that is remembering that one of the things that's really important in this is that our role is also to be available to landlords if we then need to be involved and mediate if necessary. And that's another thing that a lot of times we find that case managers and programs really don't have good landlord and tenant knowledge base, and it's really important to know those things and be able to mediate when necessary. And I think one of the things I just want to say on this before I go on to the next slide is that, the organization really should make sure that when that case management ends, what does it mean? And everybody worries about this housing retention focus and like, what if people can't maintain their housing? But again, remembering that it's client driven, and also that it should not be subjective, that you should have very clear guidelines of, about how you close cases, and it should be a standardized way so that, again, what does it mean to be client-driven, but it shouldn't be based on, sort of like everybody gets closed at a certain time. We only provide case management services for 2 months and it's over, or we provide it for 6 months, or everybody must have it. Again, keeping it client-driven, but be clear about how it ends. So let's go to the next one and talk about home-based. So
my keyboard is having trouble.
Trying to work on her keyboard.
Yep, still trying to do it.
Are you using the arrows, Sharon?
Kay, actually, sorry everybody that's listening to this. My keyboard was sticking yesterday, and I didn't think about this at all.
Got it.
But here comes my helper. Ah, there she goes.
See, we have good helpers at the Alliance. Okay, so this next one, home-based, and this is a huge shift for a lot of folks. And I really, and I know some of you on the call are already doing home-based case management, but then there are others that haven't, especially for programs that have been shelter-based case management programs, and now you've added on rapid rehousing, or you're shifting to a rapid rehousing approach and doing more case management after folks move out. This is a huge shift. But it really is important that case management meetings and service delivery occurs in the client's home, the next piece, or at a location of the client's choosing whenever possible. Because again, I think just thinking about this is about us. The burden of extra work is on us in our programs, not on our folks. Again, they're already going through a lot. They've recently moved, from a shelter or from the streets directly into permanent housing. There's a lot going on and getting stabilized in their housing in the neighborhood, and us adding a lot of extras like, and figuring out transportation to come to us and do things on our schedules is just not going to be productive and effective case management. So really going with this home-based model. But that next bullet that's really important is really respecting the client's space as their own. And it's the same thing. Say we were involved in a program that provided home-based services, respecting our schedules, respecting our space, knowing that there might be a time that maybe an appointment set up, but we're just having a really bad day, and it's just not going to feel good for us to have somebody come in at that time, or there's a sick kid or whatever. Really understanding and respecting that. Again, this is really us changing our paradigm that, it's not program-based, it's client-driven, and that's where we've really seen programs be most effectively in engaging clients when it really is driven from the clients. And one of the things that we talk about, though, in doing this is that if you really need to have clear organizational safety procedures for both staff and for clients. These kinds of agreements and respecting client space, that all needs to be, written up as a standard policy and procedure. It needs to be shared with the clients. It should be posted, and training. If you're, you really need to be training your staff on this model and how important it is. This is not a natural kind of work for a lot of folks, and it really takes a lot of training. And I think that both of our presenters can talk a little bit more about this. And then I want to go to this final principle. Collaborative. So this is where it becomes so important. This is about all of us having our natural support. Like if we have a crisis, when households have a crisis, what do they need to do instead of coming back to the homeless system and the service provider system for support? This is about really making ourselves not needed and not necessary. So the case management focus is really about the client building a support network outside of the program. So remembering that your case management is intended to provide client with independent problem-solving skills. This is, again, not us solving their problems, but them figuring this out on their own and finding those resources they need outside of the program and then making those connections. So that when we are, when the short-term assistance that we're offering and the case management we're offering goes away, this family and this household has this sort of circle of support that they can come around. So it's not only mainstream services, and in fact, probably some of the most important services that you're going to connect your clients with are services that are outside of the mainstream system. One of the things that we've done that we've developed for folks when we're out doing in our training that they can use is something we call family support map, which just really, and it's, it's available. In fact, when we post this up, we can also post a copy of that so you can take a look at that. But we have heard more feedback. It's something very simple that we just put together. There's nothing, elaborate about it. But we have heard so much feedback from communities that have taken this and worked with clients on this, how it shifts the entire conversation, and that folks are now using this support map at that very first meeting, and that first meeting is really helping folks, or the clients that we're working with in our households, to really identify their own natural supports, the things that they already have in place that they may have not even thought of as a support network for them, and then where are some of those gaps, and then leveraging those community supports that can be there long after the program ends, the kinds of things that any household needs to be part of a larger community. So let's look at the next slide. There we go. So, the thing, and this is a slide that if you've ever listened to our webinars or seen, had any of our trainings that we frequently used. And the idea is that households are, sort of this circle, and we need these circles of support around us. One of the things that we encourage every organization to do is to make sure that you're creating, a really comprehensive list of community resources and continue to identify those. So this is the way to start. These are the types of things that households may need. That like local churches is something that for those in the faith community that's a really important thing that folks need. If folks have young children and they're struggling with their children, maybe some kind of parenting support. But this is about finding, and we use this term mainstream community connections, and that is probably not the best word because it's community, but we put those two together. Sometimes when we use this mainstream, we think just about things like TANF and HHS, funded services and the employment services. But this is about the kinds of things that exist in our community. So we put those two words together to think away from, and if you see this list here, it's not talking about the traditional mainstream services that we talk about, the federally funded services, but it's the kinds of things that are in the community and helping folks to identify what those are. This is a way you can start building your resource list. It's like, these are some headings, and you can add a lot more of your circles of support and really build that list and have this be an internal document. We've also found that within programs, case managers are very sort of clingy to their own sort of supports that they've found in the community and not even sometimes wanting to share them internally. but it's incredibly important for effective programs to be very transparent and not only share these things within our own programs, but with other rapid rehousing interventions in the community. This is really about every family, every household in our community maintaining their housing. So just as a recap, remembering to keep your services client-driven, housing retention focused, home-based, and collaborative. And looking at your staff training from those perspectives, looking at your job descriptions from those perspectives. And this is an ongoing fluid process, constantly bringing this stuff back and saying, you know, where are we on this? And this is what makes rapid rehousing effective, even for those high barrier households that come into rapid rehousing with no income, huge barriers. When you provide effective case management with your eye on these strategies, you can have an effective program with all types of households, regardless of their barriers when they first enter the housing. So Sharon, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kay, and thanks to everyone for their patience as I figured out how to work my keyboard here. I just wanted to kind of underscore some of the things that that Kay mentioned, and here's some of my favorite quotes that comes from my friend Chris Billhart, who works at providing rapid rehousing to survivors of domestic violence. And one of my favorite quotes about moving from providing shelter-based services to providing advocacy-based services as part of our rapid rehousing case management approach, where the services are voluntary. And these are quotes from staff that's made that transition. And one of my favorite is really removing enforcement from the role of advocates allows new kinds of relationships with participants to form. And I think that sort of sums it up in a nutshell to me. You are when the services are voluntary, when they're client-driven, when people are in their own home and our role there is to support them and we can't make them do what we want them to do, it changes the dynamic and makes it much more, I think, more authentic. So just some other key points. The services are unique to each household, depending on their own needs. Primary focus is on keeping people housed. And we are looking to external service providers whenever we can to provide those services. Our job is to reconnect families and individuals so that they can succeed without us, and we can use our case management resources and our time to address the needs of other people experiencing homelessness who also want a speedy return to the community. So it's not just a small shift for workers, it's actually a big shift in how they think and approach their work with clients. So I am going to now turn it over to Vera to tell us a little bit about what they've done in Grand Rapids. Vera?
Hello, thank you. First, I really want to say thank you to the National Alliance for putting this together, because as I think back about us starting this work in 2007, I just think, oh, it would have been so great to have all of this information for us, because a lot was a learning curve for us. So go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll dive right in. In 2007, Community Rebuilders was really invigorated by what was going on across our state, where every community was developing a 10-year plan to end homelessness. So we had staff who were really excited about housing first and learning about getting people into housing as rapidly as possible. And that really caused us to look at the way that we provided services. And we ended up really deciding that a strengths-based model was what was the right focus for us for what we wanted to accomplish. So we began training our staff on the strengths-based model, which was really a whole new set of values for our team. We had operated typically transitional housing programs through HUD, as well as supportive service only contracts, and then some permanent supportive housing. And all of those projects had a component of, you know, in some cases, folks were asked to go complete mental health assessments before they were given services. Income was something that we really looked at to make sure that people had enough income to be able to sustain their housing after they had been in. And we were talking about taking this leap where we were going to say people with zero income could come in, and that our primary focus was going to be housing. And for us, using the strengths-based model, that was all about looking at people's strengths when they presented to us and letting them be in the driving seat and deciding what it was that they wanted from us and what we could offer that would be helpful was the way to go. So it was really a combination of things. We had to train our staff about these new values and really kind of delve into what were some of our beliefs that we held from the past that weren't going to be helpful in the new process. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for us, it was about really looking at what does our consumer need to improve their situation related to housing versus maybe thinking of all of those things like childcare and transportation or maybe particular counseling services that they needed. We were now really looking at what do they need to be able to maintain their lease and how are they going to be able to do that. And what we found was that if we asked people, they often needed a lot less than what we believed they needed. We saw them as experts in their lives, and we knew that we needed to really balance the way that we were interacting with them, where historically we were kind of coming at it with, we were case managers who had all of this knowledge and information about community resources and could link them. Now we wanted to know what was successful in the past in their housing and what could we use from the past to make this successful for them when they were looking for new housing. We also knew that we had to kind of accept that it's not us who's responsible for the change that occurs, it's the consumer. And so that was a tough thing. Staff, would often feel responsible. And it was kind of freeing to be able to say, these are their goals, this is their plan, and we're going to move in the direction that they want to go. And it helped people to sort of get a sense of relief when they started to panic about, oh my goodness, how is this person with zero income going to be able to maintain their housing long term? The role of our staff became much more facilitative, and we were much more involved in listening than we were talking in the past. So some real key changes that occurred in the way that we behaved. And a common thing that we started doing was regularly starting our meetings off with consumers, asking them, like, what needs to happen today for this appointment to be really meaningful for you and our time together to have value for you. Next slide, please. So of course, one of the first things we did was focus on housing. Just as, the previous presentation talked about, the need to have housing be your focus, we knew that what we wanted to do was get people into housing very quickly. So we gave ourselves a goal of 21 days. I'm proud to say that we're now down to an average of 14 days per household that we serve within our organization. And that's because we've built a lot of good relationships with landlords. And many of the folks that come into our services do have zero income. So we have to look at our landlord interaction very differently and our interaction with our consumers very differently. We talk about it as a business transaction, that everyone wants to leave the transaction whole, and everyone wants to get a benefit out of that interaction. So when we're discussing with consumers what they need from us, it's, what do they need to be able to resolve an issue with their landlord versus us stepping in and resolving that issue? How can we be supportive in the process? But it's really, whenever possible, them leading that whole interaction because we want them to build that partnership with their landlord, but also with the neighborhood and with the community, which goes back to that key point of collaboration. Everyone has responsibilities and obligations. And so for us, it really comes down to what are the obligations of your lease? And then what are your obligations to yourself to achieve the goals that you've set for yourself? So, a lot of times we'll get questions, well, what if this consumer decides that they're not going to follow through with their plan? Typically what we find is that people don't follow through with their plan when something has changed to their plan. And so that, again, is about us asking questions and learning and gaining information from them versus us coming to assumptions and trying to figure out what the problem might be or what service they might need. That brings me kind of to the final point of trusted partnership being really the most essential piece of our whole process. Our housing resource specialist, I think my slide just switched, or I'm losing it on my screen. You can go ahead and switch slides if you'd like. I'm not sure if everyone else is seeing a slide or not, but it's okay. The real strength-based model that we have in place is called the Housing Resource Specialist model. I talked a little bit earlier about the training that we've gone through. We actually have a certification process that is set up within our community to train housing resource specialists to do rapid rehousing. And the key components of that are really sitting down with consumers and seeing them as experts about their life. It used to be, we would sit down and we were experts about this and our program and the community, and now it's really about sharing. We sit down, and one of our very early interactions when we talk about what we can bring to the partnership, and then we ask their consumers what they can bring to the partnership, and then how together we can work to help them achieve their goals. We have to have a real genuine interest in that partnership and really learn what's important to them. Sometimes, one of the key roles that our housing resource specialists play is helping to make sure that the resources that are needed are available. So there is still that element of making sure that they are connected to things within the community, but we are providing those kind of service needs that might come up in a much different way. In the past, we would typically pay for things. We would pay for child care within our budgets, and we would pay for a lot of transportation or a lot of job training and things like that. We're doing much more brokering and linking folks to already existing resources within the community and really kind of normalizing that helping process as much as we can so that they've built a relationship with whatever provider they're going to be linked to and that they can continue that relationship long after they've disengaged from us. The other thing that is very critical to our work is that we don't see barriers as something that's going to prevent someone from getting into housing or make it more difficult for them to get into housing. We really believe that anyone can be housed, and barriers are simply evidence that there might be additional struggles, but also additional strengths that that household might have and that that family will bring to the table to help solve their housing crisis. And when people have hopes and dreams, we take that very seriously. We will assist them in any way we can to help develop their aspirations and make sure that they achieve them. And it really is important to have like a sense of excitement and joy for our consumers and with our consumers so that, when they do have those days where it feels like it's kind of hopeless, we can be there letting them know that we believe in them and that tomorrow will be better. And those are really key actions that our housing resource specialists need to take. Okay, next slide. I think that might be it for me. Oh, I do want to talk a little bit about the impact. As I mentioned previously, we started out with an average of 21 days to get households rehoused. In 2014, our average was 14 days. And about 85% of the households that we serve are stably housed 12 months post-exit. And then in 2014, our average has improved to 92%. So from 2007 to now, we've had quite a bit of improvement. But even in the real early years, our numbers were better than our other programs as far as outcomes and what we were able to achieve. We also saw substantial cost savings and a lot less burnout with our employees with this change. So a lot of good stuff has happened as we've made these changes.
Great. Thank you very much, Vera. That's very impressive. So next we're going to hear from Kimberly Tucker with Flagler Home and St. Joseph's Villa in Richmond, Virginia. Kimberly?
Okay, great. Okay, so what we did is we were actually was Flagler Home, and we were a transitional housing program in the Richmond area for over 20 years. We decided to check out rapid rehousing. We did it on kind of a slow wave. So we actually moved from transitional housing to long-term shelter with a rapid rehousing focus. In doing that, we restructured the whole program and actually rewrote all of our job descriptions and actually had our staff reapply for positions, which sounds kind of horrible, but I'll talk about that later. And while we still had transitional, we actually eliminated our case manager positions because our thinking was then that you came in and you either worked with a housing specialist or you worked with the employment specialist or both, and then you received your case management support once you moved into your own apartment. So we really tried to make our transitional housing more of a housing focused, moving to your own permanent housing. So we revamped all of our processes and procedures to become housing focused. And one of, some of these things are what Vera talked about. We used to do a hour-long intake process. We actually did a psychosocial. We developed a family life plan that covered every aspect of everything you ever wanted to do with your life. So it was about a lot more besides housing when we were transitional. When we moved to rapid rehousing, every single one of those steps became housing focused. Our intake process went down to 30 minutes. The family life plan went out the window and was replaced by a housing plan, which does get revamped updated along the process, along the way. And so we did that for a while, and actually we just began to see that the rapid rehousing was working so much better, and we actually have another rapid rehousing program in Petersburg, Virginia, and we realized after a while that people were having much more success with rapid rehousing people directly from the community with no transitional housing in the middle, a little bit of emergency shelter down there, but not any transitional housing. And so we went ahead and closed our transitional housing because we felt that the rapid rehousing model was just way more efficient and it was evidently effective, and people were actually staying housed. So next slide. So the way that we did it is, I think Vera talked about some of these things, and there definitely is a shift in thinking. So I involved the staff in the development of the vision and the remaking of the program. As mentioned in the other slide, we rewrote every single job description. I shared the job descriptions with the staff 3 months prior to the change, and they actually reapplied for the new positions. And that is that I wanted them to see that we weren't just sort of adapting our old way of doing things. This was really a complete and new shift. And everyone's job description ties in with our outcomes and has a piece to that housing process. And then we actually evaluated people on their past performance and the critical skill sets. And I think that slide might still be in here about critical skill sets. But for your housing search specialist, you really needed somebody who could quickly assess things, work independently, work with landlords. It's a little bit different than working just with clients. Really has kind of a business way of looking at things. And we also needed, case managers who were going to, be able to really look at where the client was now and not, to keep reassessing where they were and if they were ready to leave the program, as opposed to sort of thinking they need a lot more before they're ready to leave us. We developed new policies and procedures and a flow chart so people could see how it was going to work. We had a retreat, a staff training retreat, and at that retreat we took a lot of time to talk about values and how our role was going to be changing with this model. And as mentioned before, we encouraged a lot more independent thinking and ownership and a little bit less processing. I think we as social workers, and I'm one, we really like to process things. So let's think a little bit more about how we can move quickly and how we can work with folks quickly where they are. Next slide. So I was asked to share with you what our staffing structure is, and it's changed a little bit, but this is where we are now. I do have an operations director who oversees the program that we have in Richmond, where we used to have the transitional housing, and in Petersburg. And in Richmond, I also we keep our positions fairly split. Not everybody does this. So we have intake and assessment done by one person. That person also provides some supervision, case management supervision to the staff. We have the housing specialist who works directly with the landlords, does a lot of cold calling, constantly developing those relationships. The landlords are her client. And she's the one who makes the initial determination about how much rent that person is going to be able to pay. So she has that authority once she meets with the client and then matches them up with a housing resource, which she gives them, and they can also look for on their own. We give them a list if they want to start working on that. It's not just on us. It's a joint process. And then we have 3 case managers, housing stabilization case managers in Richmond. We have 2 of those in Petersburg. We do have an employment specialist in our Richmond office. We provide that position with private funds. I will tell you that I have found it very easy to raise private funds for that position because people sort of get that you need employment for, to obtain and maintain housing. However, we put people in housing without income every day. And then we have a part-time administrative assistant. And then the next is just the Petersburg. We have a housing specialist there and the two case managers. The employment specialist does go down there once a month. And I think I'll just, well, you can go to the next slide. I'll get back to how we do the employment. Like, I think it's very much in the rapid rehousing model. So I think that this is the critical needs or the critical skills that I felt that the housing stabilization case manager needs. And so this is just an example. The ability to work with clients at different levels, continually assessing the client's progress and their real need. You do have to have case managers that can juggle a high caseload with clients of very varying needs, and then maintain the documentation. And there is a fair amount of documentation with rapid rehousing. Not as bad as other fields, but it is there. And so you do. It is incumbent upon me as the manager and my operations person to make sure that people aren't so overloaded that they can't, that they mess up on the documentation, because then you're going to lose your funding. And you also have to realize that someone's got a lot of high barrier clients, maybe who will take longer to become stabilized on their own. She or he may not be able to handle, that high of number as volume of clients on their caseload. So we take that into consideration. And then the person has to have the ability to, definitely connect people with community resources so they're not dependent on the program. And I think this was a shift too for us, because I think, as Vera mentioned, we'd had our own resources before and we sort of did our thing, but we really had to get out there and find more community resources. And we've taken this to pretty much to almost an extreme, in that we used to get people to give us, in the community, to give us food, grocery cards for our clients, because they move into housing sometimes and they don't have food. We have actually stopped doing that because we want people to connect with the community-based resources for food, like food pantries or churches that have meal programs. We have a couple of clients that we've rehoused recently, haven't worked in years. They both spent some time in jail. They're actually two women. They have drug issues. They've had drug issues around selling and distributing drugs, so they can't even get food stamps. They're going to food programs to get their food. So there are ways to be resourceful, and we want folks right from the beginning to connect with the resources in their community. Next slide. Unless there's more on that I can't see. Okay, it looks like I'm already at lessons learned. And so I'm going to stop here and tell you a little bit about our employment specialists and how we work with that. We actually use the rapid rehousing model for that, and that we do not provide employment training. We do some soft skills work at workshops about 3 times a year. But essentially what our employment specialist is doing is connecting folks with the existing employment services that are already in the community, such as Goodwill, the resources, the workforce centers, which is the WIA, the federal centers, and the employment commissions, and everybody's got one in their state. And when I say connect, I don't mean just refer them, but I mean really walk people through that process, make that connection so they understand. What we found is that we're helping people now that haven't worked in a long time, don't have a comfort level even walking in that door. So we walk in the door with them. We make sure they have a relationship with someone there, and then they're able to carry that on even after, long after we're out of their lives. And we have people, call us back after we've stopped working with them after they've been discharged and say, hey, I got a job. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of, networking, and then we do a lot of emails with those people to, about jobs that are out there. But I just wanted to mention that because I think that shift of learning really how to work with, not just make a cold referral, but to really walk people through how to use those community resources is a little bit new for how we used to do things. So I think so you have to try it, and we tried it originally with a pilot. I tell people just give a small amount of money and try rapid rehousing. You will be surprised how it works. Another thing I wanted to say about case management is when you make a shift like this, you really do need to have supervision from the people on your team that can provide that. And our operations person provides sort of operational supervision. And then once a week, we have a case coordination meeting where all cases, the case managers are there, the employment specialist is there, and our intake assessment coordinator is there, and really look at everyone that we're serving and how much longer, how much more assistance will they need. And really also helping the case managers that might be having a hard time engaging a client develop skills and the ability to do that, because it is less case management and a different kind of case management than we used to do, but it is definitely still an art to it. There's an art to getting people to want to work with you when it's a voluntary-based program. We definitely, as I mentioned earlier, the housing specialists, people need to be able to use their own judgment, make some decisions on their own. And then I think Vera said this, we almost stopped referring to high barriers for a while there because we have seen that, people that we would have thought were high barrier, maybe couldn't maintain housing, have actually surprised us. People can be very resourceful. When I talk about rapid rehousing, I find that people often want to dwell on the ones, that aren't going to make it. And sometimes we even get caught up in that too. And then we have to remind ourselves, look at people that have made it. And we recently just checked on our success rate. It was actually checked on for something, for us recently, and 93% of our families are staying housed. And that's both in the Richmond area and in the Petersburg area, which is a very poor community without a lot of employment. So our role has changed, and I don't know if there's anything beyond that. Next slide, I guess. And that's me. So feel free to call me or email me if you want to hear more about it.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. So if you haven't, if you have a question, please use the dashboard. It should say questions, and you can type in a question for Kimberly or Vera. I have a couple that I'd like to ask first, and that's for each of the 4 principles that Kay introduced us to. How do they manifest themselves in each of the programs? So I guess I'll first go to Vera. What does, well, actually, both of you can just sort of chime in. But what does client-driven case management look like in your programs, and what have been some of the greatest challenges for staff who've transitioned into this voluntary services approach, and what's been some of the positive outcomes of doing this? So, what does this really mean in your programs? Vera, do you want to start?
Sure. I think for us, one of the greatest things that it has meant for us is that our relationship with consumers has really, really changed. It is truly a partnership. When we first sit down from day one, our housing resource specialists are introducing themselves and talking about the resources they bring to the table and learning what resources that consumer brings to the table. And from that, they're developing a plan together without any really preconceived notions. And that might mean, well, I guess the best example would be what we hear back from consumers. And that is, they have this, often have a history of having to tell their story or convince a provider of what they need. And they were often just so relieved to just be able to be open and honest with us and tell us what was kind of going on in their life and what we could do to be helpful, versus really feeling like we were somehow evaluating them or assessing them. And then letting them know that our services were based on what they needed is really the key that made that happen. And our staff have been enriched just because of the relationships they've had with our consumers and the friendships that it built. And, the responses in the past would be, you might get a letter, and it was always about, thanking us for incredible changes that we made in their life and things like that. The letters are different now. They're really about people telling us, thank you for believing in me. Thank you for giving me hope. Thank you for standing by my side. And that's really, I think, been one of the things that our staff are most proud about.
Wonderful. Kimberly, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think that sums it up pretty well. No, I mean, I think the thing is you also have to realize, though, too, is that some people, when they really understand what this program is going to look like, they say it's not for me. So that's okay. And we've gotten through the intake process and a little bit further, and people have thought, I really don't feel I'm in a position to pay my rent after after a certain period of time. This is not really what I'm looking for, and that's okay. And it's also, and I think as we both talked about before, someone may be done with it, maybe they just really kind of needed to get over that hurdle. And you may think, you may have started many things in their life that ideally you think might need to be addressed, but if that's not on their list of things to accomplish and they feel pretty good about where they are, then the relationship is over, and that's okay. So they're housed and they're successful. That was a switch for us because we had a very long-term goal for people before.
Okay, then I'm going to go to the next one, which is around, still having trouble with my little, which is around housing retention. So, and I'll start with Kimberly this time. What does housing retention focused services look like in each program? And what are some of the typical activities that you do to promote housing retention? And essentially associated with that, what happens when people aren't really engaging in the activities that you think they need to be engaging in order to keep their housing? If they're not working an employment plan, if they don't seem like they're very motivated to apply for jobs. A big part of how we evaluate success is that they retain their housing. What if it doesn't look good? How do you engage the family?
Right.
Kimberly, I'll start.
That's all right. So first of all, we're housing a lot of folks now who haven't worked in a long time and haven't been housed in a long time. And so with some of the folks that we are serving, particularly if they've lived out on the street or in shelter a lot, then just getting used to being in housing is a bit of an adjustment. So we've actually had to say, hey, the employment specialist is there to work with them, but it's also okay for them just to make those initial adjustments and set really small goals, like, I don't know, cooking a meal in your new apartment, and, they're trying to gather up some things you need for it. But so you really do have to start, like we used to say in social work, you have to start with a plan of that. And it is very much like what Vera was talking about. You really have to be a partner and say, what do you want to work on? What are some things you have in place that you feel good about, as well as, some of the goals that you have. You're not starting from scratch. Everybody's got something. And when they're, we're actually rapidly rehousing some people that are in a shelter right now, and we're asking the shelter staff to support the family or the individual looking for housing, and as well as the maybe employment goals. So we're trying to build a little bit of a support network in them as they launch themselves into housing and employment. I'm not sure what else I can think of at the moment about that.
Vera, anything you'd like to add?
I think I could just add maybe some of the typical activities that maybe people don't anticipate. We see a lot more difficulty for folks who have built a natural support system in sort of a homeless community. We have a lot of people who have lived on the streets and in missions and have kind of like this subpopulation that they've been engaged in. So for us, we've had to learn how to help them engage in the broader community, and that's often really, been a need for us to increase our staff's ability to identify natural supports and help people to identify them and reconnect with people that were maybe part of their lives in their past, or maybe it's as simple as getting to know their neighbors. But they can feel very isolated when they move into housing. Once they move out of that arena where they've been surrounded by a lot of folks who are homeless, and then they still have friends who are homeless who may need a place to live. So they have this added pressure of offering support and assistance to their friends, and that can sometimes interfere with their tenancy if they are having too many guests over, or a lot of people who are in need are coming to them and asking to spend the night. So your staff have to be prepared to help deal with those new challenges that the household's going to face once they're in permanent housing.
Okay, and so something that's very evident in what you just said, Vera, is that it sounds like you are doing rehousing with people who've been in missions or on the streets for a fairly lengthy period of time, if that's where their natural supports are. And so that actually leads to a question that somebody else has posed, which is how do you distinguish amongst those people who can succeed in rapid rehousing and those that might require permanent supportive housing to stay out of homelessness?
Sure. Well, when we started this in 2007, and so, you know, it was kind of new back then, and we actually started with a group that was primarily chronically homeless. And I think that was a really good way to get our feet wet. Since then, you know, as our continuum of care has developed, we are now using the SPDAT in our coordinated entry to prioritize folks. But we also really believe that often a short-term intervention can be really productive. So, for example, we have a program that just does rapid rehousing for veterans, and many of them have severe disabilities, but they also have income and are able to manage without long-term permanent supportive housing. So we can get them really stabilized in a short period of time just with rapid rehousing versus putting that much costlier permanent supportive housing immediately into place. And then if we do have someone who has been in rapid rehousing and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to maintain that, once that program is done or that funding is done to assist them, then we would definitely look at how can they transition into a permanent housing project if that's necessary. But rapid rehousing, we have found, can be quite effective with all populations. That's you know, partly I think due from our really early experience of starting with a group of chronically homeless.
Kimberly, anything you'd want to add to that?
Well, actually, we've had a similar experience. We didn't start out with that population. We started out with families. We've moved into starting people who, you know, may, or at least look like on the outset that they need permanent supportive housing. We're now doing the VI SPDAT as well. We're starting that in this community, and we've already started it in Petersburg. And in the Petersburg community, where there is no permanent supportive housing at all, we are actually setting aside a certain portion of our rapid rehousing funds to serve some of those folks, knowing that we're going to be housing them a little bit longer, you know, spending until they can get either stabilized, maybe get benefits, and or something, a door opens for them. So that's how we're approaching it there. But we have felt for some time in the Richmond community that, just like what Vera's saying, that rapid rehousing actually can work for people who we would have otherwise thought needed permanent supportive housing.
Okay, thanks. So the next question is around the home-based case management. What does that look like? How many home visits does your folks normally offer to people in any given month? And then so what are some boundaries that you put in place? Do people unexpectedly do drop-by visits? What if your clients don't want the worker in their home? And so I'll start with Kimberly this time.
We pretty much meet folks anywhere that's you know, appropriate, a nearby McDonald's, the library. We will meet in their home if that's what they want. If they don't feel comfortable with that, then that's fine. We do not do drop-in visits. The only time that we're doing a drop-in is if we have lost touch with someone, and then we'll make every effort to find them before we discharge them if they just have stopped, you know, staying in touch with us. And we send them letters as well, and you know, and drop in. But we don't do a drop in just as a general rule. So when we do both intakes and visits, we do them, you know, at a variety of places. Try to make it as convenient as possible. You know, we've been known to, if someone wants us to meet with them, like on their lunch break at work, we can do that. But it's, you know, it's pretty much whatever works for them. And we also do though take into account the safety of our workers, and occasionally we will send two workers together, you know, if there's a safety issue.
Great. Vera?
You know, that would be pretty much the same for us, with the exception that what has really evolved is that the majority of our interactions do happen in the office, but it is really determined by what the consumer desires and likes. We are kind of centrally located in what we call in our community a housing hub, so people tend to like come here. they're really welcomed, and it is on a bus route, so it can be convenient. We have the same kind of processes in place for safety, 2 staff going out to the unit, and we have, when staff are in the home, we do have additional safety training that they're required to complete on an annual basis. But we would never drop in on a family uninvited unless we had some kind of worry about them and needed to do some kind of well-being check or something like that. Otherwise, we would completely always notify them that we were coming ahead of time.
Great. Okay, and before I open it up, I'm going to do one more, which is around collaborative. Here I am still trying to figure out how the PowerPoint works. So what do collaborative services look like in each of your programs? What are some connections you are helping people you serve make in their community that you haven't? We heard about the food banks, which is one great example. Are there other connections that you're making, other linkages that you're creating for folks to help them meet their long-term goals? And I'll start with Vera this time.
Sure. I think that's really a key element of the work that we do. Is making sure that we are aware of what is within the community. So if a consumer has a particular need, we can help navigate the system and make sure that they can meet that need. We do have our Department of Human Services, their computers and their system is available here on site so that we can assist consumers if they are having difficulty with their mainstream benefits. We can actually access that system right from our location and help with that. We also bring in providers to our agency to do kind of group sessions that are all voluntary, so people can choose to come in on a Tuesday afternoon, for example, and learn about energy conservation in their home and how to make their home more energy efficient. So just kind of a broad range of groups that are available on site. But again, I just want to go back and reiterate the importance of really talking with our consumers about their connections within the community. Who do they want to have a connection with? Who can they create a reciprocating relationship with, so that maybe if they have a friend who can provide child care, they have a car, maybe they can provide transportation for that friend. So really building those natural supports is a key part of it that kind of extends beyond the mainstream resources and community services.
Vera, anything to add?
Kimberly, I mean,
oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I think that I would just say ditto to all of that, and I think that, but again, I would say that this takes a little bit of initiative on the parts of the case managers to get out there and really make those connections and help people to connect with them. And again, you know, like our employment specialist says, you know, really connecting people with those resources that are right there in their community that they had never tapped into before, and now they have a relationship. They understand how they work. They understand, you know, who the workers are and what kind of programs they offer. So maybe it's not right for them right now, but they know they can go back later and look into that, you know, trucking training program they have, or you know, something like that. It's just getting some comfort level with those things that are already in your community that they never tapped into before.
Okay. Great. So I have a number of questions that folks have typed in, and again, you use the questions box. That's part of the webinar software. And a lot of the questions actually are just about basics. Yes, a copy of the PowerPoint will be available, as will a recording, and so you should be able to check our website in the next day or two and find both of those. We also have a number of questions about landlords and rents in these two communities and how they may measure up to some of the higher costs. I might ask both of these folks to respond to what rent looks like in their community, but I also want to point folks to our webinar our first webinar, which also looked at some of the higher cost communities as well. So I'm going to start off with kind of the more case management focused questions, and then if we have time, we'll move to some of the landlord ones. So one of the questions that was asked is, have either of you been involved in either developing or attending or utilizing some case management resources that have helped train your staff? Are there resources that you're aware of that's been particularly helpful to you that some other folks might be able to use? And if the answer to no is, if the answer to both of those is no, maybe you'd be willing to work with the Alliance on creating some. But is there something that was existing that you used to help prepare your staff to do the work that you've done? Whoever wants to start.
We used a lot of strengths-based theory and solution-focused theory training. We also, like, kind of in our model that we've created locally, it's really a combination of some strengths-based stuff, solution-focused theory, and then really helping folks understand the impact of trauma. That was kind of a new piece of training that our staff hadn't had in the past. And what we've done is we've kind of created our own training model now and system. And so we kind of got to that point after a few years where our model was showing good results, and we wanted to try to duplicate that across our community. And so what happened was our community adopted that model, and then we had what was called certified housing resource specialists in our town who completed our training.
Kimberly?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has sort of evolved for us, and we do some internal training, but yes, we did a lot of the trauma-informed training in the beginning. I will tell you that what came to mind immediately is I try to, it is expensive, but we do try to send staff, alternate staff, sending staff to the National Alliance and Homeless conferences because we find such great resources there. And we find it's just really uplifting for the staff to be able to connect with other people that are doing this and hear different approaches. And then we've been fortunate that our local Continuum of Care Homeward does our best practices conference every year, and it's something that it's easily affordable, and I send my whole team there. We've tapped into several times things. We actually we have looked at that critical time intervention training, and that is available. And it was I forget the group that it's available from. We had to pay for it. So what we did is we had one of our more clinical people actually go ahead and take the training, and then now she's relaying some of those steps to the case managers. And we saw that as something that we would need to begin to, to help people understand it's a short-term service. It's not, we're not going to be in your lives forever, and we need to start wrapping this up and making, steps towards that right away. So that gave them some tools, I think. We've done, and I can't think of some of the names of other trainings that we've done because I'm not a clinical social worker. but it happens here internally.
Well, and it's worth reiterating, I think, because I think one of the misperceptions about rapid rehousing is it's a little bit of money, and it's a little bit of a referral to a housing a place to live, and then you walk away. And it sounds like there's a lot more engagement and theory and really training to make the most impactful use of your time with clients in a relatively short period of time to be as effective as possible. So, another question that we have here is around it's around Vera's program, which is actually able to get people into housing very, very quickly. And the question is, how does that happen? They're in their community. They're spending a lot of time on the housing search, looking at different options, and the family spending a lot of time deliberating different choices. How have you been able to kind of collapse that housing search portion of your time with families?
There's a couple things that I think are really important. So we have a long-standing history in this community working with landlords. Our founder 20-some years ago started with rental properties. So the landlords in our town know of community rebuilders. And so we have that unique perspective of what landlords are looking for and what they need. And we work with about 800 different landlords within the community. We really value choice. So it is about our consumer identifying what they want in their housing, where they want it to be located, what school system they want, and then helping them to make that choice. And then going to each individual landlord, if they're a new landlord, and making sure that we have a clear way of explaining our program to them, making sure that we're not making promises that we cannot keep, and just building those trusting relationships with landlords. It can be really detrimental to burn even one landlord relationship, and our housing resource specialists know that. So they truly, really bend over backwards to make sure that they're not only advocating for their consumer, but they're advocating for the landlord, and they're trying to be that objective person when they have to get involved if problems arise. So it really is about, we have a shortage of our occupancy rate in Kent County is at one of the worst right now. We have like a 98% occupancy rate. Particularly one-bedrooms are extremely hard to find right now, and we're seeing that a lot of landlords are increasing their rent over fair market rent for those one-bedroom units because they're such a hot commodity. But you just have to continue to build those relationships with landlords and get them on the bandwagon with what you're trying to accomplish. Many of them care deeply about the community and want to be involved in a solution to homelessness, and we really utilize that to get them engaged.
Kimberly?
Sure. Yes, and we have a very similar length of time to rehouse people. It's about 14 days, and in fact, it really hit me a couple of weeks ago that our landlord relationships were really good, because we had a family that was living in a car in the morning, and that evening they were placed into housing without a deposit, without any money put down until a week later. And that's because this is a landlord that actually has lots of property, not just, a more affordable properties. They have everything. They're a builder of condos. But this particular landlord and the property managers, our housing search specialist has made a relationship with them. And I think, again, really, it's all about relationship. Keeping, keeping them happy, making sure people are doing well, staying in touch with those case managers when you have your service team meeting and hearing about the clients that are struggling or maybe having some issues. And then, we are actually developing a process where we will let the client, we can let the landlord know when we're not going to be, directly involved anymore. But, we are a source of a referral. It makes it a lot faster for them to find someone to fill that housing spot. With most people that they rent to, they don't have any kind of a backup system. They've got us as a backup system. I think when we first got into rapid rehousing, we thought it was going to be a lot of individual private landlords, that just out of the goodness of their heart were going to rent us and, give our family an apartment. But that's really not true anymore. We deal with quite a few apartment complexes as well who are willing to go up to headquarters and ask for exceptions to the felonies and the terrible rental history that our clients have. But it's about relationship and keeping those relationships going.
Okay. Well, I think we've opened Pandora's box here because we may as well go down it because we have had a number of questions about this. One is just sort of basic. What does rent look like? And for the person who asked that, I just want to maybe point you to LA, who was on our call last month, and so this worked in LA too, but I think probably the rents are a little bit more reasonable in Richmond and Grand Rapids. But what does the rent look like? And before you go there, how, like for a group that hasn't done this yet, how do you start with the landlords? What are the marketing points? They haven't heard of rapid rehousing yet. They haven't seen it be successful. They haven't had to rely on your program to help them bail out of a challenge with one of the clients that's been placed there. So for a provider who wants to go down this road, how do they deal with the maybe even healthy skepticism about whether your clients are going to succeed in that program?
Do you want me to go? You obviously start out small with one or two landlords and who are willing to take a risk, and you sell them on the program through whatever little door you can open, and then they will try you again, and then they will maybe tell their friends, or you can say, "Can I use your name as an as someone who tried this?" It builds on itself. You do have to start small, but it does build on itself with success. I will say that in the beginning we were probably housing people that maybe were a little bit easier to house. You know, when we first started rapid rehousing, and now that we're using the VI-SPDAT assessment tool, you know, we are, you know, housing the people with the, you know, the most barriers first. So we are having to constantly develop new relationships. I don't know if I think I might have gotten away from the gist of the question there.
No,
one thing I will say about the rent, though, is that I've been talking about rapid rehousing for several years now, and every time I'm at a national conference, people say, well, you know, your rents must be really cheap. It would never work in my community because our rents are too high. But our rents are less than yours, but our incomes are less than yours too. So people make less in the Richmond area, and and also if someone has a large family, you just can't stick them in an efficiency always. Sometimes you just got to go to a 2-bedroom or something. And so it isn't rapid rehousing doesn't just work with the rents are cheaper. It works everywhere, as like it does in LA. So our incomes are cheaper here as well, and so that's all I wanted to say about that.
Vera, anything to add?
Unit in Kent County rents for fair market rent is $618. So we do have relatively lower rents compared to places across the country. And a lot of times, even from other local providers who might have difficulty getting into helping someone get into a unit, they'll often ask us, like, they think we have this secret list of, like, do you have a list of landlords who just take persons with CSCs? And when we tell them no, it's almost like they don't believe us. And what we really want and hope that you take away from this is that this is really about allowing your consumers to sell themselves to the landlord as a consumer who understands the full rights and obligations of tenancy and wants to rebuild their life. So it's more about making sure that our consumer understands their lease, knows how to communicate with the landlord, and understands what their responsibilities are within that lease. And once we're able to do that, they can often do a much better job of selling their self to that landlord than we can.
Great. And there was actually something buried in what Kimberly said there that is actually quite kind of a radical observation, which is that you're no longer rapidly rehousing the families with the fewest barriers. You're actually looking at the VI-SPDAT and finding the families with the greatest barriers and rehousing them first. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. I mean,
okay.
as my employment specialist the other day, she said, this is not just people with felonies anymore. This is reentry, and this is people who are fresh out of prison, who haven't worked in years, who, those are people who are not going to be that appealing to landlords, you would think, but yet you can find a landlord that will work with you. And like Vera said, then the client sells themselves by paying their rent every month and obeying the rules of being a good tenant. And, that's, of course, one of the things we stress in our meetings with our folks is, no matter what, pay your rent first, and then your utilities, and then the other things that you need in life. And we can work with you on those other resources in the community to get things like food and clothing and things that you need. So, yeah, we are housing. It's a different ball game, and actually we did see our length of time to rehouse people go back up a little bit just recently because we are serving a little bit harder to serve population.
Can I ask both of you to maybe comment on your employment strategies? What does employment look like towards the end when you're closed? Or how are you able to connect people to employment? Are you able to connect most people to employment? And what seems to work best for you there?
For us, this is Vera. For us, non-traditional employment options have been much more positive results than sort of the traditional. Our folks that we serve typically need kind of immediate, fast results. So if we have community programs that require them to sit through classes for a number of weeks, that can be really frustrating to them. So a lot of times we're looking at, first, of course, we're looking at how do we connect them to any entitlement benefits that they have a right to. Then we're looking at things that they can do to generate income immediately. whether that is bartering or shoveling or braiding hair, whatever kind of natural skills and talents they have that they can put to use. We also do, about twice a year, we have a group come in and we do a training on how to start a social enterprise. We have a number of consumers that have really looked at, maybe they're a talented artist, but they've never used that to generate income, and help them be able to do that. And then, of course, we do link to those mainstream programs, but we also bring in the temp agencies on a regular basis, come in and meet right in our offices and give priority to our consumers just through a forged relationship with the neighborhood of agencies in our community.
Kimberly, anything to add?
Yeah, very similar. I think, anything from, it's not always the traditional jobs that you're going to be able to find right away, and if you have a lot of felonies and barriers, it's going to be harder. So, landscaping, mowing. I was thinking funny because I was going to say mowing, and, Vera says shoveling because she's in Michigan. She has got the snow, I guess. And then, and I was going to say temp agencies. We use temp agencies also. Sometimes we find that people have something like a CNA in their background, and maybe they were one test short of getting that, or they just have to get it recertified. And so working on their budget towards getting that together and being able to get back into that. Yes, and I think that was a good point. People often have things in their background that they have really kind of pushed down because they've been homeless for so long, they haven't been able to give some thought to. Sometimes you can nurture that a little bit. But and doing hair, things like that you can do pretty much anywhere. And to be honest, we have a number of people who, they're borrowing a certain amount of their rent each month from their grandmother or whatever, but they're maintaining that housing. It's just not, we have to get it out of our head that it's not going to be the way that we would necessarily see it. A full-time job, that you work approximately 9 to 5 and you get a paycheck. It's going to be different than that, but they will be able to, through various ways, to connect with employment and get some income.
Okay, and I'm going to make this the last question, and I'm going to try and get back to some folks, but also when we post the webinar and the PowerPoint tomorrow, we'll also create links to the webinar that looked at how do you work with landlords and structuring the rent assistance, so those can be resources for you as well. But the last question is around coordinated assessment, and how has coordinated assessment, how is that working with rapid rehousing? And if I understand, or if I suspect correctly what has happened, both of your programs really increased your commitment to rapid rehousing before coordinated assessment was really up to speed in your communities. Is that correct?
That is
correct.
That's true for us, yes, for the Richmond area.
And how is it working with?
Sorry.
How is it working with coordinated entry now, rapid rehousing?
Our coordinated entry our continuum of care has adopted the SPDAT. We don't find it particularly useful as an organization. We find that the answers to those questions, while helpful and interesting, don't necessarily target as well as we think they could. So I think that for our community, it's an area of growth that we continue to look at and evaluate. I do think that sometimes when you add those added layers of different assessments, for us, we get people who are actually easier to house, because some of the folks who've lived on the street for a long time or have that apprehension of engaging with public entities, when they have to come in and get a SPDAT before they're referred to rapid rehousing, it can be difficult for them. So we see that some folks who may be most in need may be reluctant to go in for that assessment. But that's just our experience.
And this is Kimberly. So we're involved in 2 different continuums of care. In the Richmond area, we have the COC has officially adopted the VI SPDAT, but it's not fully implemented yet. We're using it with our veterans. and some small and then one shelter is using it. One people are already in the shelter, but it's not fully implemented here yet. But already we actually have an MOU with this particular shelter, and they are the largest shelter provider in the Richmond area. And we have an agreement to rapidly rehouse their families and singles. So we are seeing the people that are, don't have the ability to self-resolve, the people who are the highest number of rapid rehousing, and some of those who really need permanent supportive housing, but we're trying rapid rehousing for them first to see if that can work. In the Petersburg area and that continuum, we pretty much function like the point of entry, and we have found the VI for that to be, it's been quite eye-opening for us, and it has affected us in that we are only serving people with rapid rehousing that meet that rapid rehousing mark. We're doing it at a local shelter, and some people that are actually in the shelter don't actually score high enough for rapid rehousing. So then we're now needing to work with the shelter to encourage them to say, this person needs a little bit of support to self-resolve. I do think it's a really valuable tool for a limited amount of dollars, but it has, I will tell you, if you're talking about your case managers again and your staff, actually the VI for that has been a little bit of an adjustment for our staff because particularly where we are essentially the point of entry, it has been tough for our staff to see people that are homeless that do not qualify for rapid rehousing at this point. So, and now, if we rapidly rehouse everybody that has rapid rehousing score, and then we will rapidly rehouse those, particularly if they are literally homeless. But we're prioritizing our funds, and when we have it's a capacity issue for us also. So it's definitely featured into it, and it's been a little bit of an adjustment. But at this point, I think it's going to be a good thing and help with reduce some burnout.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I guess one of the pieces that I'd like folks to take away then from both of your presentations around the coordinated entry, coordinated assessment is that you don't have to wait to scale up your rapid rehousing or to get the assessments fully in line. And you also can try and screen in people with greater barriers than may even been scored for rapid rehousing and succeed. Is that correct?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes,
all right.
I think it's important to have some kind of a screening tool, and there's others out there, and I think that you don't want to, I do think that in the beginning, and I confess this, that when we first started rapid rehousing, we were probably rapidly rehousing people that could have self-resolved, but we didn't have a tool of any kind in place at that time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, wonderful. I think this has been just extremely informative. So I'm very, very grateful for everyone's time. For Kay, who had to drop off a little early for a call, and for Kimberly and Vera. It's been I'm really very grateful for everything you've shared with us today, and the PowerPoints and the recording of the webinar will be up on our website shortly. Thank you so much.
It was great. Thank you. Okay, thanks.